So how do we, or if you're coaching a team, right? So we've covered a lot of ground here. I appreciate this.
Yeah,
Let's pull it back together and make it practical
love
for
it.
the audience. How would you coach someone who is perhaps they have poor beliefs? I'm gonna, this is gonna be a bit of a stereotype here, but it'll give us a story to kind of build on. Perhaps Sam works in sales, got his first sales job. He comes from a background nothing to do with sales. He's from a lower income family, and so he's got beliefs about money or income or finances or whatever it is that are perhaps holding him back slightly. Perhaps he has some kind of beliefs of salespeople are annoying and that all I'm doing is pestering people all day. I'm not really providing any value. How do you coach someone? How do you literally coach someone from negative belief systems, some which are come from his environment, some which have been learnt, perhaps from the media? He's seen some films where salespeople have been assholes. How do you coach someone beyond those beliefs and get them to question their own assumptions?
Questioning is the key thing, right? So you need to question them and get them to see the logic that they're adopting to have that perspective in the first place. And as soon as you start opening the wound and they see that this actually isn't necessarily congruent with the truth, then all of a sudden you start building out logic at the back of that. But I think there's an elephant in the room associated with that. And I think this is where a lot of salespeople go wrong, is that objective and expectations. So brand new salespeople walking into a sales job, their objective is to make a sale. It's like, well, no, you're not going to do that for a long time, right? Like, let's start with the right objective that's going to get the right result, and that is questioning. So your objective is not to sell anyone anything. Your objective is to go in there and learn about their business. By learning about their business, that's a success. And all of a sudden, you start realizing that actually you're doing the right building blocks to selling, which is you're learning about an organization's business, simultaneously learning about your product. When those opportunities come up to start positioning your product versus a customer's need, you often grasp it. But there's also an expectation that people put on themselves. And I always say to people, someone above you is paid a lot of money to tell you whether you're doing a good or bad job. If you're the one telling yourself that, you're doing the wrong job. So, and again, I posted something on LinkedIn today that sometimes it takes 6 months for an SDR to be successful in the job where they're actually regularly booking meetings, because it takes that long to get the skill or the competency and the confidence. So I really like managing the expectation of the person that I'm coaching, making sure that they don't have an unrealistic expectation, looking what the outcomes and objectives are we're looking for. And guess what? A sale isn't going to be the outcome. The other part of this, which is really important, sorry if I'm waffling on, but
No, keep going.
What outcomes are going to actually deliver long-lasting, meaningful success? So the first sale, people put so much pressure on, but then they boom or bust. They get their first sale in, but they've built no meaningful pipeline for the next 6 to 12 months. So I'm always conscious to get salespeople to change the perspective from deals to pipeline. Late stage pipeline over the course of the next 6 months is really valuable because you can close a lot of it. One deal that you've been working on that closes and then you've got nothing in the pipeline for 6 months is a waste of everyone's time, including your employer. And that's typically where people go wrong. It's the wrong outcome, the wrong objective. But yeah, just to get to the very nub of your point, that you've got to question people. You can't do it by telling them. In the same way with a client, you can't just keep telling people what your product does. You've got to question them until they realize that there's a problem. And then you get them to analyze that. And then they go away and they think about it. And then they come back and then you continue to question and talk about what they've learned. And that's the most powerful way of communicating, is by getting people to question themselves, and you being the facilitator of that, particularly in coaching.
Do you find that when you go in and you're doing your consulting, right? Do you find that these assumptions about what salespeople should be capable of doing, what they should be aiming towards, what building blocks they should be working on right now in this moment, is this on them and their self-esteem, their self-image, what they believe is possible in sales, or is it more to do with the company culture and what they're told internally they should be achieving?
It's a mixture of both, but I think where a lot of organizations go wrong is they don't look for coachability in the interview stage. So you can hire someone that you think's got the potential of being a great salesperson because they've got the gift of the gab or they're really good at talking. But you have to take accountability that in the recruitment stage, particularly for entry-level sales roles, your number one objective should be to understand whether that person's coachable. And they don't have a part or a slice of their interview stage that is ultimately the radar to see whether someone is coachable. So I think it's a combination of the two. Sometimes we hire the wrong person who just simply isn't coachable. And sometimes the culture of the organization is that of an unrealistic one, or often they're concentrating on the wrong outcomes, like I said. But ultimately, the organization has to take accountability because they've brought that person into the job, and it's their responsibility to ultimately set them up for success, not for failure. And businesses aren't always good at doing that.
So Aaron, let's say Sam is listening to this. He's going, I want to improve my game. He's listening to a podcast like this, so he's probably ahead of the curve versus most salespeople who don't kind of do any work on themselves whatsoever, right? How does Sam know if he is coachable or not? Is there a way to maybe this is the fixed versus growth mindset, but how does he know if he is coachable or if that's a trait he needs to work on himself?
It's a really good question. And it comes back to that kind of unconscious incompetence versus a conscious incompetence. So sometimes people are shit at things and they don't know they're shit at it. And it's a manager's job to let them know they're shit at it through the questioning that they ask. But there's a couple of key indicators of coachability. Number one is, are you self-analytical? Can you give yourself honest feedback and improvement areas? Then it's about, can you actually coach yourself to come up with a strategy, not necessarily the right strategy, because no one knows always what the right strategy is, but a strategy to improve on that stuff, at least try something differently. And what you'll find is if you're sitting there and you've performed and the feedback you're getting is wildly different from what you perceive your performance to be, then there's often a big gap in self-analysis and ultimately coachability. So to translate that, Will, in terms of how you do it in the interview stage, is you need to ask sort of metacognition questions to get people to think about thinking. So I often say, like, how do you think this interview's gone? If you could improve one thing, what would you improve? Okay, you've now got a chance to do that. Go and improve it and watch how they enact that feedback that they've given themselves.
That just on that point there, Aaron, that's an amazing question because there's two ways they could go at it, right? They could say, I could have improved the interview by doing this, this, and this. Or they could turn it on the interview and say, you should have done this, this, and this. So maybe there's insights from whether they turn that question of the accept responsibility for the interview and how it's going, or whether they try and push it off as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've hired people who have performed awfully in the interview, but the feedback they've given themselves and the strategy that they come up with to improve it, and then how they've enacted on that strategy has been so good that the coachability is just stands out above every other part of their personality or skill set. A really good one to sort of to think about is ask the candidate what you think of them. So, Will, what do you think I think of you? And all of a sudden you're asking them to put themselves in your shoes, to look at it from your perspective, but also look at it from your expertise as well. And that is a really good way of getting to see how someone's mind works, the empathy, and how they can give themselves feedback through your perspective. And it's fascinating, some of the answers you get. But one piece of advice I'd always give people is if someone's sitting there going, it's the best interview I've ever had, and it wasn't, that's a clear indicator that they're not coachable and they have some serious self-awareness problems.